Night in the Woods is a 2017 RPG about anthropomorphic animals and a cult of baby boomers. It's also probably my favorite game of all time, and definitely of 2017. So now, let's take a trip down this tired, old street. The story follows a young adult cat named May as she drops out of college for unknown reasons and travels back to her hometown, Possum Springs. She talks to a janitor who probably isn't important and won't show up again. May is very reluctant to talk about why she dropped out, normally just asking, "Can we talk about this later?" Throughout the next couple days, she meets up with her old friends Greg Lee, Angus Delaney, and B. Santello. Although, one of their old friends, Casey Hartley, isn't there. But I mean, he probably just hopped a train and left. Good for him. Anyway, things seem to be pretty normal for the next few days, except for this arm outside the diner. But we don't have to worry about that. Then May starts getting these strange dreams, and her mental stability seems to be on the decline. It all comes to a head during Possum Springs' Halloween celebration, Harfest. May sees a ghost of some kind kidnap a kid and run away into the forest. She tells her friends and her aunt about it, but nobody believes her. But they still help her. Eventually they track the ghost to a cult of some kind in the forest, killing what seems to be their own member. At this point, May's mental health is basically non-existent. But they beat the cult and spend the rest of the day having band practice and pizza. A happy ending, right? Yeah, no. I skipped over everything that makes this game a masterpiece. Every main character in this game, May, Greg, Angus, and B, are all broken people, in different ways. The game explores this with the different activities you can do with them, and uses their dialogue to really dig deep. By the way, if you don't like games with a lot of dialogue, then don't play this game. Let's start with Greg, since he's my favorite. When you first meet him, he's working at the Snack Falcon, and he goes a bit crazy with happiness that you're back. He then ditches work to do band practice with everyone, where you meet the rest of the gang. This immediately sets him up as a reckless, carefree, childish character. He continues to prove this whenever you hang out with him. He's intent on doing crimes with May, or knife fighting in the forest like you used to. Then, this gets flipped on us during Greg's final friendship of him. May, Greg, and Angus are driving to Donut Wolf when Angus starts being incredibly passive-aggressive, accusing Greg of jeopardizing their future to move to Bright Harbor by doing these activities with May. This is an entirely fair accusation, and something Greg should have absolutely thought about. They continue to have an argument, which shows Greg's flaws in full. Before May came home, he and Angus were two guys working full-time minimum wage in order to move out of Possum Springs. Then May came back and Greg immediately reverted to his old ways, doing illegal activities like he would with May and Casey in high school. May, as unfortunate as it is, brings out the worst tendencies in him. She reminds him of a time when he didn't have to be responsible, which he does now. His attachment to his best friend strains his relationship with his boyfriend and endangers their future. Greg calls himself parking lot trash and believes he doesn't have a future without Angus. He's terrified of losing Angus, which he comes pretty close to doing, again demonstrating his divide between his responsibilities. Greg represents one of the game's main themes, growing up and moving on from this dead-end street. How could I talk about Greg and not talk about the boyf to Greg's friend, Angus? Angus is a fascinating character, mainly because we can only hang out with him once at Possum Springs, so he's less defined than Greg would be. Angus grew up in an extremely abusive environment from his parents, which led to him becoming an atheist. His trauma became ingrained in him as he grew up, to a point where he copes with his stress by cooking food and taking care of those around him, like when May is missing at the end of the game. He also believes that Greg saved him, just like Greg does. He grew up to be very polite and soft-spoken, although this breaks at certain points, like during Possum Jump or Greg's final friendship event. Angus is also a symbol of moving on, but this time from his trauma. A final note I have is that according to May and Greg, he's got that ass. Make of that what you will. Bee is probably my favorite character. She starts off as cold and mean, and you don't really know why. She's just an asshole, which is fine, I guess. But everything starts to fall into place after the party in the woods. She's driving May home because May got drunk, as you do, and May forgets Bee's mom is dead, which causes Bee to make her get out of the car. It's important to note that this wasn't a drunk problem. The same thing happened earlier in the game, when May asks if Bee's parents are training her to run the store. It's becoming clear why Bee has such a resentment for her. The next big clue comes when Bee takes May to bed and says, "You're just a kid. I stayed here and got older, you went off and stayed the same." The picture is beginning to fall into place, but the final nail in the coffin comes during May's big argument with Bee. Bee reveals the realization that she hates May because May dropped out of college to come live back here. Bee wasn't able to go to college because of her mom's death. In Bee's mind, May gave up the one thing Bee desperately wants and can never actually have, and she's treating it like no big deal. Of course, this isn't fair to May or the player, as the reason May left college was a lot different, and Bee is just assuming it wasn't important. But Bee doesn't know that. In fact, she asked May why she left the first day, and May just shrugged it off. So it's completely fair Bee resents her. In all honesty, May has kind of been the bad guy in Bee's life. She stopped hanging out with her in the 8th grade and started hanging out with Greg instead. Then, once May comes back from the one thing Bee wants more than anything, she treats it like no big deal and acts incredibly insensitive. Bee, of course, grows to care for May as the story progresses, but we can't and shouldn't forget how May treated her. Bee has a broken future. Unlike everyone else, she's stuck in Possum Springs. Also, I can't tell you how many times I wrote Bay instead of Bee in the script. Okay, I lied. How can May not be my favorite character? I love this cat with a derealization mental illness with all my heart. Of course, she starts off as mainly just a funny cat, with us having no knowledge of the story or why she came back. We're as clueless as everyone else. Then it slowly gets revealed. The party at the beginning literally ends with May talking about her problems and why she came back. Of course, she's drunk, so no one understands it, and neither do we. She's incredibly closed off about her problems, often just saying, "Let's talk about this later," which, from my experience, is pretty accurate for situations like this. She starts getting weird dreams that really annoyed me when I first played. These dreams don't seem to have much significance, until her conversation with this creature that definitely isn't God. The creature tells her, "You are swimming out to sea, and beyond are creatures blind and terrible." This recontextualizes the dreams as demonstrations of May's failing mental stability and her swimming out further and further. This conversation with God also mentions one idea of the game, that the universe is dead and everything is being forgotten, with no one to remember it. It's important to note that this is May's disorder talking. She mentions during the couch talk near the end of the game, how everything became dead shapes to her that didn't mean anything. She was all alone, and everything was being forgotten with no one to remember it. And speaking of May's couch talk, damn, that shit's emotional. May finally opening up to the person she's grown close with, and telling them the story of her mental illness is fantastic, even though the story is really sad. She finally tells us the story of the incident, an event we've heard about from other characters, like Lori calling us killer, and Mr. Pendleton saying, "No one's forgotten who you are and what you did." We finally learn why she came back home. And then, of course, the night ends with May leaving everyone to face Ide on her own. Of course, that's a stupid idea, and her friends save her. Then they confront the cult together. This is another concept in the mental health world. That people struggling will isolate themselves, which May did in college and what she's trying to do here. And the people who love and care about her came with, even though she keeps trying to get them to go away. After murdering some dads, May has a conversation with the black goat, the deity that the cult worships and has presumably been the cause of May's declining health. Her speech is one of the reasons this game is so personal. This realization is a major step in May's recovery, which we can see through the gameplay. Throughout the beginning and middle of the game, she's very energetic, usually running and jumping, climbing up on the telephone poles. During the ending, she no longer jumps or runs, instead just walking very slowly. Then, after her conversation with the black goat, she can jump up the steps of the well, showing she has begun the healing process and her mental health is on the rise. May's story is one of a broken present and healing yourself through the company of others. Band practice is something that happens a lot in this game. You just get together with your friends and play a song, and you usually suck at it. The songs you can play are Die Anywhere Else, Weird Autumn, and Pumpkinhead Guy. I want to talk about Die Anywhere Else, since it seems to be the most important of the three. It's been theorized that Casey wrote the song, mainly just because we know he was in the band and it mirrors exactly what we're told his beliefs were, which is the sad irony to it, because as we know, he died in Possum Springs, alone. Once I learned that Casey wrote the song, it just kinda broke for me. It wasn't a jam anymore. It was a depressingly ironic twist that played into another major theme of the game, loss. We lost Casey. We're losing Greg and Angus. We lost the food donkey. And if the cult is to be believed, we're losing Possum Springs entirely. But maybe it's better that way. Maybe we should let Possum Springs die, instead of keeping it in this half-life that'll never really come back. Night in the Woods is a very sad game. It's a game about moving on and loss, but it's still optimistic. The last scene will never not cause me to smile. It's permeated by the knowledge that none of these people are okay, that Greg and Angus are still going to leave, that Bea will still probably continue to harbor resentment for May, and that May isn't fixed. But the notion of hope bleeds through. There's a reason that in the game where the climax is fighting a murderous cult and interacting with an omnipotent being, the ending is doing band practice and getting pizza with your friends. It's the idea that no matter how shitty life gets, we can still try to be normal and just have fun, because life comes and goes away too fast. The game does come to a nihilistic conclusion, that the universe is dead and empty, and there is no one to remember it. But it's a happy one too. May's speech to the black goat is incredibly moving and emotional. It's basically the game's message in a nutshell. I want it to hurt, because that will mean it meant something, and in the meantime, I want to hope. These two ideologies, one of nihilism and one of hope, run parallel, but they cross here in an impossibly beautiful way. I know people say this for a lot of things, but Night in the Woods honestly did change me in a way I didn't fully realize for a long time. It's an incredibly personal experience, and I'm so thankful this game exists. Night in the Woods feels like a friend I only knew once a week before she went away. Thank you for watching.